The Douglas Coleman Show is made possible with support from Seth David Radwell, a recent guest on the program and author of American Schism, How the Two Enlightenments Hold the Secret to Healing Our Nation, released this past July. As Publishers Weekly writes in its recent glowing book life review of American Schism, business executive Radwell's epic debut examines the historical influences that have led to what he sees as the collapse of politics in the United States. Seth Radwell makes the case that the current chasm between the American right and left can be traced back to the 18th century's Age of Enlightenment and the basic tenets of liberty, equality, and reason. American Schism provides a historical perspective that can help us fight today's unreason with reason and bridge current-day divides. American Schism by Seth David Radwell is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. For more information, go to AmericanSchismBook.com.
It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, David M. Kelly. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you very much. Let's see. You are an author. You've got a book series. Well, let's see. One's called the Joe Ballen series, and then you've got another book out, which I don't think I can pronounce the title. Can you pronounce it?
It's called Coleman Storm.
Okay, spelled Kwelengsen. And this is
yes.
A new book series. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's one book out at the moment, and I've got another one coming out in June.
Okay. Before we talk about the book at all, why don't you just tell us a little of your backstory, how you got interested in writing, and maybe give us a brief overview of the Joe Ballen series, which is already out, and then we'll touch on the new book.
Okay. I've always been a big reader from a very young age. I read my way through several libraries full of books as a child, and so I've always been interested in reading books and the places that they kind of take you to and the imagination involved. And I always kind of felt that I could do some writing myself, but didn't pursue it for quite a while. And then I got a job where I had an extremely long commute on the train, and I decided I was going to use that time to do something more productive than just sit there idling the time away. And so I decided I'd actually turn my hand to it, and that's how I got started. The Joe Ballen series wasn't the first thing I wrote. I wrote a couple of other novels that I didn't publish because I didn't feel that they were good enough. And the Joe Ballen series was the first ones that I actually published. Joe is basically a space engineer who's suffered an accident. So he's at the beginning of the series, he's trapped on Earth. And in the series, Earth itself is kind of trapped by a bunch of space-going people who kind of like prevent Earth from expanding out into space. And so there's a big kind of conspiracy theory idea where somebody's building a prototype jump ship that will be able to take people to the stars, and they don't want this. The space-going peoples don't want this to happen. And Joe himself, he's kind of he's a very smart-mouthed character. He's always got a quick comeback, and it often gets him into a lot of trouble.
Who would you compare your writing style to?
I think it's kind of probably a mixture. My writing tends to be quite sort of noir, like the old kind of noir detective sort of series. I think like my big influences are probably Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov. I read so many of their books, it's bound to have been an influence. But I think every writer has kind of their own style, really, and that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to kind of develop my own style rather than emulate somebody else.
Okay, I'm just looking at your bio here. It said for several years you were a bass player and vocalist in a heavy metal rock band. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm not sure how good you would say the vocalist side of it was, but yes, I was.
So what kind of music was it? I mean, heavy metal. Who would you compare your band to?
It was very much sort of along the kind of Metallica kind of style, I guess.
All right. Are you still playing?
No, I don't play anymore. I'm not professionally. I sometimes fiddle with my guitar, but I don't actually play in a band or anything.
Okay. Are you a full-time writer, or do you do something else?
I'm a full-time writer now. I have been for 5 years.
What were you doing before? You said you had a really long commute. What was that job?
For a long time, I was a project manager working on IT projects, which was very stressful. That particular job was before I moved to Canada. I'm originally from England, and so that was back in England, was that particular one.
Okay.
But project management, it's very stressful, kind of in any circumstances, quite honestly.
So, what brought you to Canada?
I have a couple of uncles living here, and one of them made a visit back to England when I was a young child, and basically I kind of like sat at his heels for kind of 2 weeks, listening to all of these tales of the sort of wilderness in Canada and everything, and that planted this seed in my head that I really wanted to kind of move here. And again, it took some time, kind of like to actually get around to it, but eventually I did, and me and my girlfriend at the time, but now wife, moved over 17 years ago now.
Okay, and she's from the UK as well?
Yes.
All right, is that fairly easy for people from the UK to move to Canada? Because I know it's what is it called? A dominion? You're sort of connected in some way.
It's kind of somewhat connected. It's not the same as it used to be. It's actually quite an involved process now. The whole process took roughly 3 years to get through all of the paperwork and red tape and so on. And it's a long process. It's not. Everybody thinks it's kind of easier because of that connection historically with Canada, but actually it's a lot harder than you would imagine.
Okay, I forget if it's a Dominion or Commonwealth. I get confused as to which one it is.
It's part of the Commonwealth. It's no longer a Dominion.
Okay. Right.
It used to be a Dominion, but then it became independent. I don't know exactly when, a long time ago.
Well, I think technically, what is the difference between a Dominion and a Commonwealth? One is more self-governed than the other?
Yeah, well, a Dominion is basically the country is ruled by the other country. So Canada was actually technically ruled by Britain, whereas Commonwealth is basically countries that used to be ruled by Great Britain, but have since become independent, and so they kind of maintain friendly links, but they're not actually governed anymore.
Oh, I see. Okay. So your new book, why don't you tell us a little bit about this? How is this series different from the other one?
The new series is a spin-off from the Joe Ballen series. I had a character in there called Logan Two Feathers, who was Joe's kind of best friend, and he appeared in several of the books, in the Joe Ballen books, and I I always liked the character, and he kind of later on in the Joe Ballen series, he made a kind of major discovery, which I won't mention because I don't want to spoil the books for anybody, but he kind of makes a key discovery, and so after that, I really kind of thought I wanted to write at least one book based around that character alone. And so I wrote the first of the Logan's World series. And initially it was just really my intention to write one book, just as a spin-off. But as I was writing it, I realized there was kind of more to the story that I wanted to tell. And so now it's basically turning into a trilogy. And I'm actually writing the third at the moment. And the second one is coming out in June.
Where did the title come from?
It's actually Salish, which is an American Indian language.
Oh, all right. I don't know why it looks Norwegian. Probably the SCN at the end. But
yeah, and it basically comes from the fact that this character Logan Two Feathers, his heritage is Salish Indian, and so I wanted to reflect that in the title. And basically the planet, which is Logan's World, he names it because he discovers it. And so he names it after like something from his own heritage. And when he discovers it, he spots a continent on the planet which reminds him of an eagle. So Coleman is the Salish word for eagle.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I've never heard that word before, and I'll still have to work on pronouncing it. But
it's a very rare language. There's not a lot of documentation about it, and it's quite hard to find out any information, to be honest.
Is the book out now?
I actually have. Yes, Coleman Storm is out. The second book, which is Coleman Dawn, that's coming out, I'd say, in a few months.
Okay, great. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes, I do. You can find out all about my books on davidmkelly.com.
davidmkelly.com. Okay, great. All right, David. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and best of luck with the book series. I hope they do well.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to the Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Gary Turner. Hi, Gary. How are you?
I'm doing very well today, Douglas. And you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for calling in.
Good.
I appreciate it. And nice to have you on the show. Let's see. You are the son of a career soldier, according to your bio. Where are you located? You in Canada?
Yes, in Calgary, Alberta.
Calgary, Alberta. Okay. And you've written a book, looks like a book series, called I'll Take My Chances. Why don't you just tell us a little bit we'll do this in reverse. Normally I ask the guest to tell us about themselves first and then the book, but let's talk about the book first and then you can tell us about yourself afterwards. How's that?
Sure.
So tell us about this series. How did it come about?
It was born out of an idea of writing a short story for my wife regarding our 2011 motorcycle trip through Western Europe. So she'd encouraged me to write a short story and submit it to a magazine. And I wrote the short story, an essay really, and I realized I wanted to say more. So I started with this, and the term I'll take my chances, because the story covers about 4 generations of my family's history and young men going to war. It seemed appropriate to call it I'll take my chances. I don't want to go to war, but I'll take my chances because I feel I have to. And that's where the title came from.
Okay, is this all the same family in the book, you said? It's like great-grandfather and grandma. Okay. And it starts 1850s. Okay.
Yes. On my father's side, going back probably 4 generations at least, they were Assiniboine. Now, that's, for those of you not familiar with that, that was a shirt-tail branch of the Northern Sioux. And if you've heard of the Sioux Nation,
sure.
So that's where the story begins. And I had to make up a legendary character because there was no written records of my family history back then. So I made up a legendary character. But what I wanted to do, Douglas, was bring in the idea of visions and spirituality, because I've read a lot about that, and I've also attended various, how would I call it? Not conferences, but I've attended various, almost like sweat lodges and whatnot, and I've had that explained to me how important that was to the people. So I wanted to use that throughout the entire tale. So through all 3 books, the spirit of that warrior, reluctant warrior, it passes down and he passes along messages to his descendants. So that's where the story came from.
Okay, that's sort of the common thread through the series?
Yes, it is. And one of the characters, and he's based on my paternal grandfather, Sidney, who came to Canada in 1911. He left England. And following the First War, which he served in, he returned to Canada, and he married, would have been my grandmother, who died 10 years before I was born. But he married her. And so I took the story on from there and then down through several generations based on my father's generation through the Second War, and then into mine being a baby boomer. A lot of young Canadians during the Vietnam War era, at least with the Americans, went across the border to serve with the American Army. So I wrote that in, and that character is based very much on myself. So I know it sounds perhaps a little disjointed, but it does follow a chronological order through the books.
You know, I didn't know that Canadian soldiers served in Vietnam.
About 40,000. A lot of them went across the border into the States, and they used, in some cases, they had relatives in the U.S., so they used those addresses as their address, even though they had come from Canada. So that's why the records are a little bit, I shouldn't say a little bit, they're inaccurate. But the best guesses are just over 40,000 Canadians served in Vietnam. And I was old enough to have been involved in it at the very, very end. So that's why I wrote the character that's based on myself. I wrote that into the story, and that character served in Vietnam.
Okay, now do all of your characters live, or do they die in the wars?
Several of them pass away or killed in action. I guess I should call it that. Several of them are killed in action. One of them comes back from his service in the Second World War, with a severe case of PTSD, and he proceeds to make the life of his family a living hell, if I can use that term. And he eventually perishes because of his PTSD. So some survive, some didn't, and that's part of where the title came from. I'll take my chances.
I want to go back to something you said about visions and spirituality. How does that play into the book? I mean, how do the characters in the book experience that?
Generally, when they had made a decision to put themselves in harm's way, the one character that's based on my grandfather, he was torn between staying home and helping to run the family farm that he had in southern Manitoba. He was torn by that and not wanting to, and he married a woman in the story based on my grandmother, who was Métis. So he didn't want to leave them. He didn't want to go to fight in a foreign war, and yet he'd come from England. This character, as my grandfather had as well. He knew that conscription was coming to Canada during halfway through the first war, and he joins the war. And as he's leaving the farm and going into the nearest small city to enlist, he gets some messages from the character who I named Walking Thunder. So he gets those messages: "This is not your war. You should not be going." And during that character's service in France in 1917, 1918, he gets various messages, spiritual messages, passed down from Walking Thunder. So that plays throughout the entire story. I was asked a little while ago, what would you hope that readers would take away from reading these stories? And my answer is basically the energy of spirit never fades if you wish to tune into it, because I believe that. The first portion of the story, as I said, is based on the character Walking Thunder. Well, when I wrote that last after I'd written the entire story. I weaved some of the parts into it, but I wanted to write his part last. And I went to the Black Hills. And if anybody's familiar with the Black Hills in the U.S., that was, for the Sioux people, the Black Hills was considered heaven on earth. And I went there, and I sat and had a vision at the foot of a mountain that a lot of the young Sioux men went to have their vision to get their warrior name. And that's where I had a vision on how to write that. That's kind of what finished the book, at least front to back. So I hope that made some sort of sense.
Yeah, it did. Did you say that you have participated in the Sweat Lodge ritual?
I've had it explained to me, and I was not allowed to actually participate, but I've been allowed to observe it and had the purpose of it explained to me by the elders, primarily elders of the Blackfoot Nation or Blackfoot Confederacy, however you wish to term it. And so that's where I got a lot of that information from.
Okay, can you briefly explain what it is for people that don't know?
Certainly, a lot of the native people, and we're halfway between the terms of using Indian and Indigenous. So if I flip back and forth between the two of them, it's only because I'm trying to explain the story.
Well, I think in the United States we say Native American now.
Okay. Well, I use that term throughout the story, so thanks for giving me that heads up. Anyways, a sweat lodge is where people that have, say, an over-reliance on a substance that's not good for them, they might partake of that. And the elders will bring those people in. And what it is it's a framework of willow branches or young trunks. They will form it and put animal hides over top of it, and they'll light a fire and heat up stones, and then they will have water, and they will put the superheated rocks into the water, and it creates steam, and it's considered to be a cleansing. And a lot of people will say they have experienced their visions of what they should be or where they should be going in life, and it's considered a very beneficial. I wouldn't call it 12-step. I wouldn't call it that, but it's a recuperative and re-energizing experience for most people that go. I asked to go and they said, well, maybe later, because I have a small percentage of Native American blood in my background. So I have yet to do it, but I have read a lot, and I have listened to quite a bit of the stories from the elders. And I would love to do it one day.
Okay, so basically it's like a sauna that people go and sit in. And how long do they usually sit in there?
So it depends on how long you can stay in there. Some people have a very low tolerance for it, but as you said, it's like a sauna. So I would think an hour, 2 hours.
Oh, a long time. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah, and it's quite the thing to witness. I don't know if you'll ever have the opportunity to see it, but it's quite, to me, it's quite uplifting to see that, and when people come out from it. And you can see, I don't know if I would say they changed completely, but you can see there's been some sort of awakening with a lot of the participants.
It's not something that there's a lot of media about, because I think it's sort of kept, I don't want to say it's kept secret, but it's not something that is broadcasted as happening all over, you know?
It's not something that's advertised publicly, like,
right.
Come on in.
Yeah,
Everyone's
right.
welcome. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, there's no big posters on the highways. They come see your vision.
No, come see this week's vision. No,
yeah, nothing like that.
It's taken far more seriously, and I really respect that.
All right, Gary. Well, listen, we got to wrap this up. The book series is out. All 3 books are out.
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't plan on it being 3 books. When I first finished the first draft, when I thought I'd finished writing this, it was 350,000 words long, and my first editor looked at it and read it. She said, "There's no way you can publish something like this. You have to trim this down." So I trimmed it down to about 250,000 words, and the first publisher said, "This is far too large for 1 book. We want to make it 3 because the average novel is about 80,000 words."
Right. Yeah.
So being a little inexperienced, I agreed to it. Now I wouldn't, but hindsight's perfect.
Well, you did good, actually, because some people struggle to get the second and third book out, but you just you knocked out the whole series in one shot. So you did all right.
Okay, well, thank you for that. It was a lot of fun. It was a learning experience for me as well.
Okay. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Certainly. I entitled it The Blue Max Chronicles.
Blue Max, BLUEMAX?
Yes.
Okay. Chronicles.com. Is it .com or .ca?
It's .com.
.com. Okay. All right, great. Is that a personal website or just your publisher, or what website is that?
It was one that my wife and I developed with some help from people.
Okay, so it's a personal website. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Gary. Well, listen, Thanks for coming on. Take care.
Thanks for the invite.